The Vision 2030 aims at transforming Zambia into a prosperous middle-income nation. The vision comprises 3 priority sectors: economic growth and wealth creation, social investment and human development, and creation of an enabling environment for sustainable socio-economic development. But is Zambia ready to turn this vision into reality amid the ever-changing climate, which is said to be affecting social and economic development of many nations globally? Welcome to the first edition of Think 2044. And today on the program, we'll be discussing government strategies in addressing climate change towards the Vision 2030. I am your host, Mark Fason Mukuka. Joining me on set is the Permanent Secretary in charge of Development Planning and Administration in the Ministry of National Development Planning, Mr. Chola Chabala. Sir, welcome to 2044.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome viewers to this important program.
Today, we are discussing government strategies in addressing climate change towards the Vision 2030. Joining me is the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of National Development Planning in charge of Development Planning and Administration, Mr. Chola Chabala. So once again, welcome to the program. And how is business in the ministry?
Well, thank you very much. Business in the ministry is interesting, challenging, but one step at a time.
Okay, perfect. Looking at the Vision 2030, what are some of the national policies that the government is putting in place concerning climate change?
Yeah, first let me start by saying that the vision sets the development trajectory for the country. It runs for a period. In other countries, it could be 20 years. For the Republic of Zambia, it's for a period of 25 years. In other destinations, it could go up to 30 years. And as we get to the vision, we have building blocks, which are national development plans. And they are medium-term in nature. They run for a period of 5 years. And within the subsisting national development plan, you can actually get a few building blocks or pillars that contribute to attainment of the Vision 2030. So that's one of the approaches we use in terms of moving towards meeting the Vision 2030. The other one is, if you have a plan, it has to be translated into tools that will enable your aspirations to be financed. So we have a number of development financing mechanisms. The medium-term expenditure framework translates the development plans into budgetary provisions. And then we've got the annual budgets. So those are some of the policies and strategies that help in meeting the Vision 2030. And of course, added to that, we have got sector-specific policies and strategies that are crafted around the pillars of the vision that we alluded to.
Okay, perfect. What are some of these sector-specific strategies?
We have, for instance, the Agricultural Investment Plan. We have the Economic Growth and Stabilization Program, which the Ministry of Finance recently developed. We have the Road Sector Investment Program. We have education policies, okay, the Education Sector Investment Programs. And I can go on. There are quite a number of policies that help contribute towards meeting the Vision 2030.
Okay. We have had a number of development plans, national development plans, and this time around we are looking at the 7th National Development Plan. Yeah. How feasible have these plans been in combating climate change?
First, we need to be realistic that the discussion around climate change was not as intense as it is now, because I think it's in the recent past when the world actually came together to realize that the world, there was a variation of the changes in the way in the climate change patterns. We have seen increases in floods. We have seen persistent droughts during certain periods, and then of course the weather patterns are changing. If you remember way back in October, we could have the first rains. That's no longer the case. Sometimes we don't even have rains in October, November. We have the first rains in December. And the first, one of the interventions, some of the many interventions was, there was a summit in Johannesburg okay, which was dubbed the Earth Summit, to discuss issues around the need to embark on sustainable development pathways with a view to ensure that we undertake economic development without necessarily causing harm to the environment. And later on, I think we had the Rio Summit that basically adopted a number of overarching strategies for member states to follow to ensure that we put in place mitigation and adaptation measures coherently as a globe to reduce greenhouse emissions, and also to ensure that we are within the current capacity that the Earth can actually sustain in terms of creating a balance between economic development as well as ensuring that the environment is left intact, and we also do not create effects with regard to advancing our socio-economic indicators.
Okay. Talking of treaties, Zambia is among the many nations globally that has signed, or let's say is a signatory to some of these treaties, most especially on climate change. How have these been translated in some of the policies that Zambia is formulating in combating climate change?
First, I'd like to mention that Zambia is part of the COP21. That was recently agreed upon by world leaders in France. And arising from us being a party to COP21, we are supposed to integrate the provisions of the COP21 into our national development plans. You rightly pointed out that we have the 7th National Development Plan, which provides overarching policy and program directions, which we have to undertake as a country. But beyond that, we are supposed to come up with an implementation plan. And I have a document here, which is basically the implementation plan. So within the implementation plan of the 7th National Development Plan, under the pillar regarding reducing poverty and vulnerability, we have very comprehensive strategies and identified programs and projects that will help advance our adaptation and mitigation programs. Okay.
How readily available is this document in terms of accessibility to the members of the public so that they can browse through and get to know some of the content?
If you go to the ministry website, you'll be able to find a copy of this document. Come to the Ministry of National Development Planning, we'll be able to give you copies. Beyond that, within all the provinces, we have provincial planning units. We also have district planning units. Our officers throughout the country went around disseminating the 7th National Development Plan and its implementation plan. So it's quite readily accessible. I must admit that it's been actually running very fast. We've been giving this free of charge, and it's on the website, so people can download and browse through and be in a position to actually update themselves in terms of what government has put in place.
Okay, interesting. Now, how has climate change affected Zambia's economic growth?
Not long ago, 2015, before 2015, we had been consistently growing our economy at an average of 6.1% in terms of GDP growth. And we were one of the fastest growing economies. We had one of the worst droughts in 2015, and the growth was actually downgraded to a possible 6% to slightly below 4%. So taking away a possible 2% growth in GDP. Now, just 2% alone in other destinations is a remarkable growth. Now, one of the factors that actually is attributed to that downgrading of the growth rate was that we had very severe droughts. I think at that point, our total generation capacity was somewhere, electricity generation capacity was somewhere around 2,300 to 2,500. And if I remember the figures correctly, I think we could have lost somewhere around 700 or more megawatts in terms of electricity production. What does that do to the economy? When you cannot produce, you can't industrialize, you cannot create jobs, you can't diversify the economy, you can't reduce poverty, you cannot actually promote industrialization in the rural areas. So if you want to reduce high levels of inequality, which we are grappling with because our Gini coefficient is about is over 0.59, you can't do that because you can't direct investment in rural areas with a view to ensure that the levels of marginalization between the rural and urban economies is lower. You cannot enhance human development because a majority of the people, especially in rural areas, that actually are supposed to benefit from innovations, innovation in terms of technology, cannot access that because one of the major inputs is energy. So there are a number of things that basically get thrown in disarray.
Okay. Now, agriculture is mostly conducted in rural areas, and these are the people that are likely to be affected more when it comes to climate change, despite it affecting almost everyone.
Yeah.
Are there any deliberate policies that your ministry is putting in place to help the rural farmer come out of these impacts on climate change?
Absolutely. I think when you're intervening, or if you're undertaking climate change interventions, you've got two major strategies, and that is adaptation and mitigation. From agricultural point of view, you have a combination of both. Mitigations are those programs where you basically try to come up with investment portfolios in areas where you want to reduce global warming. You also actually do mitigation with regard to huge investment in energy, with a view to ensure that you have production throughout the year. Now, if you don't have rainfall, okay, and you have, for instance, in the northern part of Zambia, where we have got huge water bodies, and electricity generation was constant, you have an increase in an energy mix, you can actually improve your irrigation system. And without relying so much on rain-fed agriculture, you can adapt and use irrigation and be in a position to produce meaningful outputs to enable people cope with the reduction in rainfall patterns. We are not able to do that. If we are not able to do that, then it means that your adaptation strategies are failing. So one of the strategies that are contained, to come back to your question, in the 7th National Development Plan, is to increase our energy mix. Right now, we are somewhere around 3% in terms of energy mix. Our target, by the way, it's not very easy to increase that rapidly. The 2030 target is to increase our energy, alternative energy sources to 15%. Within the 7 NDP, we want to raise that to 5% to enable the rural farmers cope with the vagaries of the weather and be in a position to produce at least something to enable them meet the challenges that are associated with reduction in food production.
What are you doing to address some of these challenges, the perceived challenges, especially in meeting the Vision 2030?
Of course, any development interventions are met with a number of bottlenecks here and there, okay? And the number one thing is to create a supportive environment to ensure that the strategies contained within the 7th National Development Plan are effectively implemented. We are dealing with issues related to land management, okay, to make land readily available for everyone to access it, use it as an empowerment mechanism, and use it as a means for those that cannot access technology, okay, go to the banks, acquire resources, and be in a position to invest in innovative approaches to agricultural production, for instance. Mm-hmm. The other aspect is the government is decisively dealing with the issue associated with devolving the deployment of resources to lower levels through decentralization. We are accelerating the implementation of the fiscal decentralization and the devolution of functions. Mm-hmm. And we also dealing with the a number of laws are being reformed. The Public Finance Act is being reformed. The Planning and Budgeting Act is also on the table of Cabinet with a view to create coherence between our national development plans and the budget, and to ensure that our intentions within the climate change subsector are transformed into reality.
Okay, thank you so much. You are still watching Think 2044. Shortly, we'll be coming back. We take a short break.
Trees cover 30% of our planet. They play a huge part in absorbing gases such as carbon dioxide, which is turned into oxygen. Thousands of trees are cut down every year for charcoal production, agricultural purposes. Dry, infertile land leading to crop failure, inflation and hunger. All this contributing to the climate change. Climate change is real. Plant a tree, save the earth. Get involved.
Think 2044. Call the free hotline 2044 for more information. This advert is brought to you by the Ministry of National Development Planning, Pilot Program for Climate Resilience, PPCR, with support of the World Bank Group and the African Development Bank.
Welcome back. This is Think 2044, and today we are discussing government strategies in addressing climate change towards the Vision 2030. I am with the Permanent Secretary in charge of Development Planning and Administration in the Ministry of National Development Planning, Mr. Chola Chabala. You've talked of an integrated approach in these issues. Are you embracing private sector participation in fighting climate change?
If you read the financing chapter of the 7th National Development Plan, we basically have different sources. One of the sources is through private sector participation, joint ventures, and then the other one is direct development financing through the budget. And of course, we are also enlisting the support of cooperating partners. Maybe let me take advantage of your question to basically just allude to the fact that Zambia is one of the countries that has actually received overwhelming support from the cooperating partners in our efforts to combat climate change. And therefore, the private sector has a very, very important role in helping us actually move or accelerate the pace at which we are combating climate change. One good example is in the energy sector. Alternative and renewable energy, sources of energy would require that the private sector also comes in, because government has actually increased the tariffs. So that has created space for the investment by the private sector to help move actually the energy mix forward. The other aspect is in agricultural production. We need private sector intervention to increase food production and productivity. They've got the innovation, they've got the technology, they've got the mechanization that is required to help us produce, for instance, beyond the 3.6 metric tons of maize to 12 metric tons of maize if the private sector were to occupy the space. The same with soybeans and many other crops that are variable and important to livestock production and direct consumption by the people.
Okay. While promoting and supporting integrated approach, what are you doing to ensure that our farmers who are not into the private sector, say, but those that are being supported by government, are protected so that even as they are doing their business, there is a win-win situation in as much as we want to fight climate change and bringing on board the private sector?
First, what is important from the climate change perspective is to come up with the various adaptation mechanisms. For instance, some farmers, maybe in the Western Province, are losing land, which they use when there are floods. So in order to ensure that we provide the required protection for those farmers, we are dredging canals to reclaim the land. Okay, and we are also supporting farmers to come, we're creating an interface between the private sector that have got the innovation and the ingenuity with the local farmers so that we can have a mix. It's supposed to be a win-win situation. Standing alone on their own, traditional peasant farmers cannot enhance productivity if we do not infuse the new technologies and various adaptation mechanisms, coming up with new hybrid seeds that will enable them survive even in low rainfall periods, or be in a position to adapt to the changes in the weather pattern. So those are some of a number of innovations that we're putting in place.
PS, are you receiving any form of support in terms of finances from the different stakeholders that you are working with?
Yeah, I basically just talked about the program that we are undertaking in Western Province. I think it's been so successful because some of these artifacts that the local people are developing out of their own innovation